Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We are the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm John Kennedy.
So here we are. We're in Mark 12:38-44. Jesus has a strong critique of religious leaders, and in particular noting their clothing. And I just want to note that all three of us today have a jacket on. So we're dressing up for the one podcast that calls our clothing into question. Okay, everybody, here we go. Mark 12:38-44. As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogue and places of honor at the banquet. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." So here we are. We've skipped in the gospel from chapter 10 to chapter 12. We're now in the last week of Jesus' life, which Jesus spends the daytime in the temple precincts, not in the temple proper, but in the precincts. He's likely at Solomon's portico, which is the outer edge, where he can teach, and men and women and the faithful and the non-faithful can come and mix about, and this is where the treasury is, the place where people put in their copper coins. All the coinage in their day was copper coinage. It just depends on what was stamped on it. There was no dollar bills and no credit cards and no Apple Pay. And Jesus is seated, so he's watching this from a teaching position, and there's a great crowd gathered around him, and then he brings his disciples aside for a teaching.
Yeah, good setup. We've skipped quite a lot. We've basically skipped a lot of the drama of Holy Week, the triumphal entry, Palm Sunday, of course, the cleansing of the temple, and so on. And now here we are, the third day of after Jesus enters Jerusalem, according to Mark. That much I do know. Yeah. But anyway, so things are really heating up, and we see this in what Jesus has to say about the scribes. Right? This is Jesus. Really taking a significant shot at them. I mean, as you were reading the passage, I just kind of wrote down, wow, Jesus really says it all here regarding their true values and their true motivations. Their piety, their whole way of being is not about honoring God according to Jesus. It's about being greeted with respect. It's about getting the best seats. It's about appearances. And this is very, very scathing for the people who are supposed to be the keepers of righteousness and holiness among their people. So it's no wonder they want to kill him.
Yeah, and I think this is related to that practice of korban that we talked about in that divorce passage.
Nice. Oh, wow, nice.
You know, where people would save their money to give to the temple rather than support their widows and their households. So here, apparently, there was a practice where a dead man's estate would be handed over to the scribes to manage, deeming the widows unfit to manage their own estate. So they would take a percentage of the estate as a fee to oversee all this. And so I think the implication here, according to some writers, is that this widow is kind of a victim of this system, and exploitation and extortion and things were common in this practice. So devouring widows' houses is possibly, a reference to this idea. And here she is paying her tax or giving them their fee or whatever she's doing. It's really all she has, and they're very gladly accepting it from her as they parade around. So I thought that was a very insightful
I like the bringing in the Corbin piece of this. And It's interesting. We're learning to read the gospel with Hebrew eyes here, to quote Chad Bird, and then of course we're going to apply it to our own lives here too, and understanding. So one of the things I stumbled on, which was in Mark's gospel, he really takes on the scribes, actually much less so for the Pharisees, and he really does hammer them. But in this question of widow, the widow is very heightened, as you know, in the Hebrew scriptures. There's a lot about the protection of the widow. They don't have the systems that we might have in the United States, at least in principle, to care for those who don't have anything. There's no social safety net here for widows if they're not cared for by family. So this is particularly difficult. And of course, in our own country, we have people taking advantage of widows and elders all the time. They don't necessarily widows, but same sort of thing.
So Elizabeth, you said something that I found very interesting. If I heard you correctly, you were saying that the widow's offering might be a fee or a tax for some protection or management or other benefit received by the scribes and their associates.
I mean, that's not in the text, but the idea that they were owed a fee by the estate. I probably misspoke. I mean, I don't think her 2 coins were that fee, but the idea that they could exploit this widow in all sorts of ways and take everything she had, including her offering, her temple offering. I don't know if that was supposed to, there's no mention of what her motivation is here, but the greater picture, I guess, from Mark's telling of the gospel is that she serves as a prophet type, to expose the exploitive system of the temple, the corruption of the temple. And Jesus, I don't think it's an accident that Mark says he sits down opposite the treasury, opposing the treasury and opposing the temple system that is exploiting this woman. And she's kind of showcasing all that's going on, in contrast to the scribes. So when I was reading about this practice of, entrusting estates to the scribes, the idea is they take a compensation by fee. And so I was conjecturing that maybe, she's bringing her fee, but either way, she's handing everything over willingly, ignorantly, I don't know, or obligated. I don't know either.
I think the ultimate
almost
point
beside
in this,
the point.
I was going to say, I think the ultimate point in the story is actually, the story's actually not about the widow. I think the story is really about the contrast between the widow and the treasury and the scribal actions in the treasury, and to point out again what is true religiosity, what is true devotion, and to expose vanity, greed, hypocrisy all mixed together here, and to say this is what it is. This is This is an interior thing too, not just an exterior thing.
Yeah, most definitely. I focus the most in on the contrast, and the exterior show of the scribes, and the interior purity and humility and disposition of the widow. And it's a profound example. It's one in a series of Jesus comparing somebody who Jesus' audience would think would be the righteous person, the holy person, the good person, with somebody who, in this case, might be just simply undervalued, neglected, marginalized, exploited, simply, right? Or morally suspect, such as tax collectors, right? So Jesus does this a number of times and gives us really interesting and I think counterintuitive models of true holiness and true piety, which is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's all of a piece with this upside down kingdom, or if you've called it the upside down pineapple cake or something like that.
Upside down pineapple cake.
The total inversion and reversal of all human values. And it's really a beautiful thing. In one, I'll just say one more thing and stop for now. But in one commentary I read on this text from the patristic period by a Paulinus of Nola, he talks about the widow's self-forgetfulness, and that really rung a bell with me, because self-forgetfulness is a key theme in Christian spirituality, mysticism, that comes up again and again, that we must let go or transcend our self-centeredness and our self-referentialness, and become empty of that in some way in order to be filled with God and united with God. And the widow is doing that, and the scribe is most definitely not doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I like about your comment there is I do think that there is an interior question about conversion of heart. And the conversion of heart is a conversion to love and the multiplicity of how love is lived. And we missed that because we did the All Saints propers for last week. We didn't have what preceded this in the lectionary, which is the greatest commandment. And to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul, Jesus' response, and your neighbor as yourself. And that when one experiences a transformation in the spirit and a changing of disposition of heart, out of love one gives, not out of desire gives. I always say that when people pledge to churches, they give with their hearts and not their checkbooks. There's an internal conversion here. And I would like to say that, I think part of what we get maybe is some of that, but we also get the question of sacrifice here, that she is sacrificially given. There's a sacrifice in all this too.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful about her disposition of heart or her motivation. I mean, I really think the way the story's told, there's no element of Jesus admiring her generosity or, showcasing her support of this good cause, the temple. There's nothing in the story. The context is that he's scathing, he's giving a scathing indictment of this system of which she is a victim, and they're supposed to be taking care of her, and instead they're stripping her of everything she has. And, it's maybe more likely that she feels so wholesale in their debt or whatever. I mean, if they have their thumb on her about her estate or whatever the things are that we might add into the context, I think it's more likely that she's on the side of having to do this and feeling like, maybe they'll take care of me if I keep doing my duty and, to my last coin, but she's a victim of this system. And in terms of the context of this story, I think that's what Jesus is pointing out. And he says to his disciples, eventually, no stone will be left on another of this grand temple. It's complete sham. Like it's a building it's a system that will crumble. And I think the way Mark tells his story with various characters throughout, this woman serves as a prophetic image of what Jesus is going to do on the cross, pour out his whole entire life in sacrifice to this system of human exploitation and scapegoating and violence. And, she's a lot like the woman who anoints Jesus with expensive perfume. It seems like so gratuitous. There's no purpose to the naked eye. Like, what is she doing with this? And the disciples say she should have sold the money and given it, or sold the perfume and given the money to the poor. And, they don't say she could have used it for her own benefit. She could have gone and bought new furniture or whatever she needed or wanted. She chose neither thing. She chose to just pour it out to show that, it's an anointing for Jesus' death, and I think that the point is his death is going to really bring life. We can't read any of this without the resurrection context, but it's a prophetic act. It's not just lavish generosity. You know what I mean? I think Mark uses these stories to be foretelling what Jesus is about to do.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and really valid. The linkage of these two episodes, the sequence of them, that is interesting because Mark frequently links episodes or teachings by connective words that don't necessarily indicate one thing happened after another. It's very possible that this is that these two things happened in sequence, but because they have the connective word of widow, and that happens elsewhere earlier in Mark with words like child and so on, where things are sequenced in a way that almost definitely did not happen in real life. That makes me wonder about the relationship, the temporal relationship between these teachings and these episodes. Just to say that what Jesus says in the first part is clearly a critique of a system that exploits widows and vulnerable people, as Jesus says, devours widows' houses, which is such an evocative term. But I think Jesus's relationship and view of the temple was complicated because he pronounced judgment on it in a very clear way with his cleansing of the temple. And as you said, he foresaw its destruction, which could be read as a divine judgment, but also more basically it's just he could see what was coming with regards to their conflict with the Romans, who would be the agents of that destruction. But also in other places, when Jesus heals people, he might say something like, go make your offering in the temple. And he, when he critiques the Pharisees and scribes elsewhere, he says that they should not neglect their outward piety, but also attend to these inner or more important things. So I don't think Jesus was totally down on the temple, and I get the sense that he does value the widow's offering as a true expression of piety. But it's a complicated matter, and you're right, we don't get her subjectivity at all. We don't get anything about her motivation or disposition. I might be biased here simply because I really like the spiritual symbol that this gives us, with the scribe as the representative of hypocritical spirituality, and the widow as the representative of the sort of purity of heart and simplicity that can enter the kingdom, that can see the kingdom. But a very interesting thing to think about, which is Jesus's view and relationship to the temple.
Really interesting, because we're taking a look at a story that is very, very familiar to us. In fact, almost so familiar to us that it's hard to contend with. And it can be kind of like a rock that is slippery because a stream is going over it so long. And I really love the contrasting approaches to look at this, how you've thought of this and how you've thought of this. And I do think that because this story has a certain simplicity, it invites this kind of not so much exegesis, but eisegesis, which is what some of this is. Elizabeth, you've laid out a very, very strong prophetic view in understanding of this. And it's interesting, John, on your maybe tapping the brakes a little bit and say maybe perhaps there's some more nuance in this. The question of Jesus in the temple, now that is really worth on another podcast our taking a look at. I would say that some of the dialogue around this is really rooted already in the Hebrew scriptures. The giving to the temple, all this stuff is rooted in the law. This has to do first with the tent, and then eventually it gets applied to the Herodian temple. And the clothes that are worn are originally for the beauty of holiness. That in order to approach that, the priests were symbolizing this. This is where the tassels come from. It's the law. In the way that we wear chasubles, and the clothing that we wear is not our clothing, but symbolizes that for the community. And that the role of the temple, in John's gospel, we get Jesus saying, "Well, I am the new temple," essentially, right. And then his prophecy about the fall of the temple. But actually, what Jesus thinks about it is certainly. Whether or not it's a wholesale, it doesn't matter anymore, or whether or not it's just suffering from corruption, human corruption and malfeasance. These are all really interesting lines of argumentation. But it seems to me, as we come out the other side, there is no doubt that Jesus is condemning any kind of religious leadership that reeks of vanity, reeks of hypocrisy, reeks of anything that
neglect of the poor.
Neglect of the poor, which is where I was coming to right to the end with Gutierrez's death the other day. The patron, the father, not patron, but the father of liberation theology, and the whole articulation, which was so outside the pale when he first wrote the liberation theology, and is now very much embedded in Catholic social teaching, and which is God's preferential treatment for the poor and the maltreatment of the poor by the power structures of the world. And so, very, very interesting that that's also layered in on all this.
That's beautifully said. I think that I don't disagree with the nuance that Jesus, he was a devout and practicing pious Jew. I mean, he regularly went to the synagogues. He did go to the temple. In another gospel, he spends his childhood in the temple, and I agree that it's something that's, a good part of the heritage, but he's become so disgusted with its corruption that's what I'm really commenting on. And he does talk about it crumbling down, whether it's metaphorical or literal. In Mark, the temple curtain is torn in two at the moment of his death. And I think for Mark's telling, that means the end of this need to go through all this machination to access God. He's come into the world, and we have full access, the schizo of the breaking, tearing open of the heavens, that Jesus would come down. That's Markan. So I think Jesus is mostly sad, disgusted, and grieving that it's come to this, and he's trying to teach his disciples, not to be idolatrous of the institutions that do these things. It's more important to protect the poor than to worry about the preservation of the institution.
Yeah, I those points are well taken. I think that's a good reading of the tearing of the temple, that something decisive has changed in how we come to God and how we can access God. Peter, you mentioned something earlier that I want to return to because we're in stewardship season. The question of sacrificial giving. That it's easy to give out of abundance, which is what Jesus says here. Right. Well, relatively easy, comparatively easy. Right. It should be kind of easy to give out of abundance. When what might be a large sum to somebody who is poor or without your own means, it might be significant for them, but for you don't even notice the difference. That's easy, and I would say Jesus is indicating here that he's not really impressed by that. It's not really what he's asking for. I mean, it's brass tacks is better than nothing. But what he asks for is ourselves, our whole lives, right? Like Christianity is built on the notion that Jesus is Lord, which is sort of archaic sounding in our day when we don't have monarchs and so on in the way that we used to. But nonetheless, that is the ethos, however we might want to translate it in the contemporary day. And so for Jesus to be Lord is not for Jesus to just be like a guy who we go to when we're feeling down, or a guy who might have some wisdom that we might want to follow or try on sometimes, and who's like a movement or institution we might want to like support a bit. No, for Jesus to be Lord means that we give our whole lives. And why I'm coming back to this whole life thing is when Jesus says at the end of this passage, the widow gave out of her poverty, and all she had to live on. This literally means in the Greek, she gave her whole life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think this is what Jesus calls forth from us as our Lord, which is an immense challenge, but one that I think that we need to return to again and again.
Yeah, this sometimes raises the whole question of, can we be the widow here? Is Jesus calling us to give everything, literally everything we have, giving her whole life? And I, this is where we go to apply radical Jesus teachings to the contemporary lives that we lead, and particularly at a time when where 50% of people in the United States feel and worry that they will not have enough money when they retire or for the later stages of their lives. And so the question of what is needed and what is given and what is sacrificially given. And as you know, because you're in the same church business, that one of the phrases is that grace is free, but but church is not, or but the temple is not, or the mosque is not, or pick your religious institution in the world. The institutions, the buildings that have roofs, again transcend one's particular religiosity, and how it is that these places, these communities stay in business over time, and it's open season here. When we would have in our own community, we have people who certainly give out of their abundance, and certainly people who make sacrificial gifts, and it all works together to bring meaning to the life of the body.
Yeah, I mean, this is a story about money, but when you're speaking about giving our whole selves, I mean, it's a disposition. It's not just, everyone should now empty their pockets, but so we fixate on the money in this story, but yeah, it's so much more. It's like, in your workplace, are you giving your whole self and disposition, to the reconciliation of differences and communicating and loving your neighbor and all that sort of stuff. It's so full.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, thank you for hanging in with us as we've done our Midrash here on a passage that's so well known to us. This is a podcast that is being done ahead of time before the passage it comes to you on Sundays. And I just want to acknowledge the great sadness that we have. We have all received news that the very Reverend Robert Willis has died. A great shock to the world, a tremendous sadness to the world, and a great loss for the world, and a great loss for anybody who knew him personally, like losing an angelic presence in their life. And we, the three of us in our community, feel very, very, very poignantly blessed that his last ecclesial stop was here at St. Mark's, and it gives us all pause for a great silence, that he joined us on our podcast, that his last morning prayer podcast was from here, his last sermon was from here. And I say that because I think that we accidentally got cast onto a stage not of our deserving in any ways, because Robert was a man of the greatest of graces and the greatest of holinesses, and we were just super blessed that he stopped in our world, and are super sad that this was his last ecclesial stop. And so prayers and blessings and thanksgiving for Robert, for his long time and passionate, incredible, wonderful partner in life and in ministry for Fletcher. And so God bless a man we all love. Thanks for hanging in here with us, folks, and we love it when you like and subscribe and you pass on and you comment. We are very much enriched by your life, as we hope that this Midrash helps you with yours. So peace be with you. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.